Okay, right. So for those of you that fancy carrying on with the coastal scenes and boats project, which we started last week. Last week I did a demo, sort of, something a bit like that. I can't remember which one I did actually, but it basically just a kind of painting, water theme, waves demo. This week we've got to move on to drawing boats. So I'm just going through a couple of ideas that I use when I'm drawing boats. So I thought, I don't know what you think about this. I think sort of some of the simpler images are where they're either on the, straight on the side or almost straight on ahead. So that to me is quite simpler, but the morning group did seem to think my ideas were very simple. Sort of thing. So with something like this, if I was drawing one of these boats, I'll do this one because it's just a little bit nearer to me. I would start by just sketching very lightly, just getting a rough idea where I think the boat is going to be, the sails are going to be, and the hull is going to come out here. So I'll just sketch, where I want it all to appear on the paper. Actually, that's not enough room. I need to move over a bit. So I'm thinking probably in here. Hello. So yeah, so that would be me, just feeling my way around the shapes. And then once I'm there, I tend to draw from the top down, and just find that easier. I know a lot of people are inclined to just get the hull in and then grow everything from there. But I find sometimes getting some of the smaller shapes in first, like this kind of, it's not quite triangular because it's cut off at the top there, but that little shape in there. And then from there, I can then get this main sail. I know if I measured from here to here, that is roughly the same, just slightly smaller than here to here. So once I've got something drawn in, I've got the length right and the width right, I can then use that to compare other things. So about then, just a tiny bit lower, that'll take me to there. And that's where the mast could be. And then this next sail, you can check the angle, perhaps put your pencil against those sort of angles. So that could come down to here. And actually that comes right the way down to the front of the boat, that one. So if I've got the angle right, that can come right the way down. Just going to get a sense of where that sail would be. That's going to be about here. This is the bit where I found it difficult actually. This bit, I think, is quite straightforward. But these three sails, I found that a little bit more challenging. So perhaps get that line in there, and then this point here, where this little triangular sail meets this one, yeah, that's working fairly all right. That would be something like that. And then the next one, that point there is kind of down and slightly to the right of this one, so something like that. And then the other sail is tucked in under there, something like that. And then that comes right up to here. So that gives me the sails, and then the front of the boat is where that ends, starts. And then I can kind of, this top line, probably better to get that line in first, and then the bottom line. It's fairly level at the back. It comes up a bit at the front, a little bit levels out the back. Looking at the spaces here, we've got about that much space, then we've got the next sail. So we could get that in. And then that gives me the ending of the boat about there. So, as I say, working through some of the smaller shapes, and then to the bigger shapes. That's how I find it a bit easier to work out. So that's looking at the boat from the side. Do something very quickly from the front, and then something that's a bit more challenging, which is more three-quarter view. So these sort of boats, so these two paintings are the ones, this one was an acrylic painting I did quite a few years ago, and I think the Leisure Painter wanted me to do some, I used to write for Leisure Painter magazine, and they wanted me to do like a stage by stage in acrylics demo, so that's what I did. So I painted this one for an article, so this was a studio painting. So that's one of the boat paintings. This other one was mostly painted on Mersey Island, and then a few of the details I put up in the studio. I think the second time I went back, it was so windy, I had trouble holding on to the board. It's blowing at me, so I had to finish it in the studio. And that's another one of my boat pictures. So these sort of boats, again, I probably would perhaps use that one. Sort of get an idea where I want to be drawing. So I'm thinking about there, should fit the rigging and the boat in. And then just kind of get something like that. And then I find that if I start with some of the details in the cabin, like the windows, so this has got 5 windows across there. So I'll speed this up a bit, but if I get the windows perhaps a little bit deeper, if I get the width right and the depth right, then that's a good place to start. And these are slightly, I think these are slightly, they kind of fan out a little bit as we're coming out. And I think the two on the edge are slightly narrower. So rather than draw a cabin and try and fit all those in, sometimes it's easier to get a rough idea where the cabin's going to be. Give yourself a little bit of room to manoeuvre, and then, yeah, that will go in about there. And I'm not too far out from where I wanted it to be, but that sometimes can help. And then I can then draw the side of the cabin to there. Now the roof of the cabin will come up to here, and the top bit sort of like that angled across. And then I can look at how much space I've got under the windows until I can start to see the hull. And there's not that much on this one. I think on this one there's a lot more space. But it's part of what gives them their individual character, the different spatial relationships or proportions. So that one comes up to there. The middle of that is just slightly to the right of this window. So that could go in there. And then just follow the top of that shape. And then the same on this side, just try and follow that shape. In terms of how wide that is, I can just measure that with my pencil. It's nearly 2 windows, so I'll get 2 windows. It's coming out to about here. And then on this side, it's a bit more on that side, so about 3 windows. So that will come out to about here. And that comes down to there. In terms of getting the depth, see how many times that goes in. About twice. So I think I'll actually be a little bit higher there. Let's come to there. 1, 2. So that would take me to about there. And that gives me the basic shape of that one. And then from there I can then get all these bits of rigging in and see where all these different bits line up. There's bits up here and that sort of thing. So that's kind of my strategy when I go out sketching, is to kind of look for these little details. I think I ended up drawing this way because a lot of my drawings are in pen. So with pens, your marks are very definite. Once it's down, it's down. So starting with these little details is a lot easier to get the proportions and things. So that's kind of how my drawings unfold. I'll show you another one. This one, I think, in some ways, is a little bit more challenging. So that bit there was this one that I had a look at this morning. I've got this one here. Where you're seeing, well, with this one, you've actually seen, from the top and the end and the side. So that's quite a challenge. I'll just show you that for a minute. I'll put it up there. The way I go about drawing something like that is to try and find the middle of the boat and try and see what the angle is through the middle of the boat. So in this case, it's about that. I've gone out for a little bit and that probably wants to curl in a bit. And then from there, I can then look at the 2 shapes of the sides. You'll quite often find that if you've got like a straight edge against one of these, one side will appear a lot more curved than the other side. So that's something to be aware of if you're seeing something from almost like a 3/4 angle. So this side felt a lot almost like straighter than this one. This had a lot tighter curves in it. So that's a little bit more like that. So I'd start with those. The other thing you can look at, or that's quite a challenge, is the foreshortening, because this is going back in space and off at an angle. So one way that can help you with that is to sort of draw a rectangle around that, and then have a rectangle the same sort of proportions, and you know that top shape needs to fit into there. So I had one of my students this morning was drawing something a little bit like this, but from the other way, and it did end up sort of more kind of stretched out like that. So it's just getting that sort of foreshortening. So with something like, I won't do the same one again, but something like this one here, I'm thinking the middle of that boat is about there. So the angle between the front and the middle is actually almost vertical. That could be something like that. And then I could draw, if I draw a rectangle like that, so I don't want to twist it, I just want a rectangle that's kind of parallel, maybe a tiny bit higher. That gives me a bit of a framework to work in, so I'm thinking something like a little bit like that. And from there, I'll do this just lightly with the just come over a bit. Yeah. So hopefully that should help me to get these shapes a bit wider, and it's about here actually. So that will be the top, and then these end bit, the end bit is going to be more like that. And once I'm happy that I've got a nice shape to it, I can then go over with darker marks. It's also quite good to get the inside bits in. So there's like a bit at the front, and there's a plank here that you could sit on if you're rowing this boat. So that's a little bit about, maybe a bit wider there. So that's a little bit about how you might want to go about drawing a boat where you're seeing either 2 or 3 sides. So how maybe used to that. If you wanted to just have a go at practicing drawing today, you're very welcome to. I've got various pictures here of boats, including these sort of ones, or otherwise whatever you fancy doing.
I've never thought of doing it in a rectangle before, always in a figure 8.
Yeah, they say that, don't they? But I don't know. I don't really know how to make these into a figure of 8. I've heard this sort of thing in some of these magazines. You do. I don't know how you do a figure of 8. Oh yeah, that's it. Something like that, isn't it? And that with the front. Oh.
The back is always the bigger of the 8.
Something like that, I'm not sure. But it doesn't really fit, it only fits a certain kind of boat, really, that. But I think this is a bit more, you could apply to different, more circumstances, really. Yeah, I have heard that thing, right? I've never got my head on that. Okay.
Cheers.